And hello, everybody. Welcome to the Apocrypha Apocalypse. I'm Gary Michuta. It's Monday. That means it's time for a chill stream. You're right. 3:30 a.m. here in the Detroit area. I don't know anybody that that does streaming this early in their day, but I do because I can't stand not doing Deutero research, and also I can't stand not being with you guys. So I hope everybody's doing well. We got a very interesting program today. In fact, I'm probably going to keep my hellos a little bit short, just because we got so much reading to do over a really bizarre list. Now, this is past the red zone, folks. So we're past Jerome and Augustine and the North African councils, Innocent the First. Now we're moving into the 5th century in the 400s. And there is a list here. And since it's out of the red zone, it usually doesn't show up on people's radar screens. But there's another reason it's not on people's radar screens. It's because it's bizarre. That's all I can say. It is a very, very strange list. In fact, it's not even a list. It's a list plus a synopsis. In fact, it's called a synopsis of sacred scripture. And it's also synonymous. It was attached to the writings of Athanasius, but pretty much nobody believed it was from Athanasius. So we don't know who it's from. We're not even sure if it's in the 5th century. It most likely is probably later. And I haven't really formulated my own guess as to when it was written. My gut feeling is it's actually quite late, maybe early Middle Ages. I'm talking like 6th, 7th, 8th century, maybe, simply because of the nature of it. So we're going to get into all the deets of this very bizarre, self-contradictory mishmash of weirdness today on the Apocrypha Apocalypse. So I hope everybody is having a great time. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. I know we're prime time in Australia. And for those in England, you're probably just starting the day. So, and if you're at night here in the United States, everybody's asleep. So pleasant dreams, especially you, Sam. We are having a lot of fun. I did a members only hangout yesterday, which we do for members. And that was a ton of fun. Fortunately, due to circumstances beyond my control, I was actually a little late. I felt terrible about that, but we actually went an hour and a half, had some great discussions, talked about sola fide, some interesting arguments on that end. We talked a little bit about the canon, did a little preview of today's show. Just lots of great input from everybody. Had Gary 2.0, had Daniel Hayes on here, and we have a lot of fun. So guys, please consider becoming a member and join us. You also get free previews, things like that. It's pretty crazy here in the world headquarters. My new book on the Messiah will be coming out shortly. It's going to be released, I think, right around Easter. And so things are gearing up with lining up interviews and things like that. So it's kind of crazy that way. I got some other projects in the works and trying to keep up on research like the chill stream. Like today, it was up to last moment. In fact, Dr. David Zavaris, Triple D Dave, actually showed up on the members only stream. He just kind of like has the members only stream streaming in the background while he's doing work. And I did a bat signal call out to Dr. Dave because I wanted his opinion on the synopsis, because I wanted to have something definite for you today, this morning. So I wanted to tap him. And he didn't have too much to say other than he thought it was bizarre. And when he was doing his Esdras, Greek Ezra videos, which, by the way, are here on the Apocrypha Apocalypse, highly recommend. If you have any questions about whether the North African councils affirmed Greek Esdras instead of Ezra, Nehemiah, you should watch those channels. But anyway, he said basically he decided not to comment on it just because it's so weird. So We will run into a lot of weirdness in this period after the red zone. But like I said, since it's after the red zone, it doesn't really have a very important status when we're looking at evidence for which books were included by Jesus and the apostles as part of the positive faith for the church, simply because it's so late and it's secondary character. You'll see what I mean when we get through the book. So as we do on Chill Streams, I want to welcome everybody to the Apocrypha Apocalypse, beginning with Lino. Lino is the first to put a comment in the comment section. Lino, good to see you as always. Also, Janice is in the house, so it's a party. Welcome aboard, Janice. Great to see you as well. And we have Neo-Catholic. Thank you for the prayers, Neo-Catholic, or Neo-Cath, I should say. Maybe it's not Catholic. But don't remember seeing your name before. So if you're new to the channel, welcome aboard. I see people are starting to pile in. And welcome aboard, everybody. I know we have a lot of people that lurk out there. And a lot of people who are not Catholic. Maybe you don't, you actually do believe the Deuterocanon is Apocrypha. I'm right. Hey, I got it right. All right. Oops. Got it right. Welcome aboard. Good to have you with us. We're just trying to put the facts out, give our interpretation, let you decide. Do your own research, find out what you think. Trying to think. We're going to try to do a team stream sometime this week. There is, and by the way, if you're out there, what was it? What is his name? Something history. Oh, I'm coming up blank. Who is bidding, really wanting us to review John Meade's talk that was videotaped. I think I already did a breakdown of his talk, but they want me to do it again. So we probably will do that. Maybe we'll do a team breakdown if the guys are up for it. That's coming up this week. We did a breakdown of SoCal Preston T-Fan debate. That was a lot of fun Saturday. So there's a lot of stuff going on here on the channel. So please take a second now if you wouldn't mind. In fact, I'm going to do it right now. I'm going to give my own self a thumbs up. Please give us a thumbs up. It helps the algorithm, gets the, you see the flash of me refreshing the screen. It helps us with the algorithm, gets this apparently out to more people. And it doesn't cost you anything. It's gluten-free, zero sugar, and it's fun to smash the like button. So we appreciate it. Also, if you haven't subscribed, please consider subscribing to the channel. We have crossed the 14K mark, and it'll be really cool to see if we can hit 15K. I don't know. I'm starting to have my doubts. This is such a narrow focused channel. It's amazing we have 14K. Honestly, I am dumbfounded that there's that many people. Avoid history. That is the name. Thank you, Lino. I knew it was something history, but he really, really wants it. And we try to aim to please on this channel. Is Gary 2.0 a teacher? He'd be very good with Protestants. Explain well on the chat. I don't know what his occupation is, to tell you the truth, but he would make a great teacher. He's really cool. We got a great chat room here on the channel if you're new to it. Very, very well-informed chat. And Gary 2.0 is amongst the, he's in there, and he's always putting up like additional information about whatever is being spoken of. So he's the guy for like just basically keeping everybody up to speed in the chat room for those who maybe aren't as stellar as the veterans who are here, which I don't know. Everybody seems super intelligent in the chat, which is very cool, because you go to some other channels and you read the chat and it's just, I don't know, very, very disappointing. Very disappointing. Okay. Okay. I want to get a few more people into the channel before I start the material. I'm trying to think. Okay. Subscribe, like, by the way, the PowerPoint I put together, actually, I was working until the last second to make sure it looks semi-decent for you guys. Try to make it big so you can read it. The PowerPoints are available for patrons. So thank you, patrons out there, for patronizing me, I guess that would be. Is that the right word? That's negative. I don't know. It's 3:40 in the morning. That's the best I could do. Thank you for your support. And as part of the perks, including like free ebooks and stuff, I as soon as I'm done here on the Apocrypha Apocalypse with my chill stream, I jump to Patreon, upload the PowerPoint. So there's an amazing collection of PowerPoints up for patrons. And by the way, if you're not a patron, I don't want it to be a paywall. I want this to be free of charge. I'm trying to get the word out about the canon and all the lies and half-truths and biased information on against these books. I'll give it to you free. Just contact me and I'll send you the PowerPoint. Just make sure you let me know exactly which program. And please, I can't send all of them or something like that. Just I could do maybe one. Otherwise, it'd take my entire day trying to find all of the PowerPoints, when actually it'd be just as easy to go on Patreon and access them all there. And by the way, use the search channel, the search engine on YouTube, because there, of course, there's the live presentations. Hey, Ad Gloriam Christi is in the house. All right, awesome. Good to see you, my friend. And you know what? I'm going to start. Like I said, we got a lot of reading, a lot of breakdown to go through. And I try to keep chill streams to about an hour, hour and a half. And we're going to try to do that today. So with that being said, let's go to the PowerPoint. What we're going to look at is one of the most bizarre artifacts of history, I guess you could call it. Yes, I totally agree. It's called the Synopsis of Sacred Scripture. It's dated in Jurgens, Faith of Early Fathers. It's 490, 500. I'm including it here in the chill streams because I'm more or less going chronologically through the early church fathers. I'm putting this in the 4th century simply because that's the earliest this could be written. As you're going to see, there's good reason to believe it was written later. It could be as late as the 10th century, although that's probably the absolute latest it could be. Most people put it perhaps 5th or 6th century. Many put it even later. We don't know when it was written. We don't know who wrote it. We don't even know what it's saying, to tell you the truth. So again, so strap yourselves in, guys. This is going to be bizarre. As we go here, as we do on the channel, we're going to go to Jurgens' Faith of Early Fathers. Very nice 3-volume set if anybody wants a collection of quotes for confirming doctrine from the early church. It says a work entitled Synopsis of Sacred Scripture is preserved in the tradition of the writings of St. Athanasius. It lacks authenticity. Its lack of authenticity is perceived already by the Marist editors. So very early on, it was understood to be pseudonymous. It's put as dubious in the Ming. Call it Pseudo-Athanasius or call it anonymous, but it cannot be of Athanasius for telling and obvious reasons that the canon, which he displays, is not the canon expressly proclaimed by Athanasius in the 39th Festal letter, as he speaks about in volume 1, page or section 791. Dating from the closing years of the 5th century, the Synopsis of Sacred Scripture is referred to with some frequency for the sake of its scriptural canon. The work is, however, considerably more than a mere canonical list. It provides the opening line for each book of Scripture and a substantial digest of the contents of each book. So, yeah, brace yourself. I don't know if you guys are Mr. Bean fans, but one of the Bean movies, one of the funniest lines is where he rigs a virtual roller coaster ride and cranks it up to 10. And he goes in with his unsuspecting friend and he leans over and says, "Brace yourself." One of the funniest lines. Okay. Now, with that, I'm just doing this as a reprieve for all the craziness we're going to see here. So Jurgens gives the following translation. I give you a machine translation, which actually is almost identical to, oddly enough, I think it was Moses Stewart's translation, or Stuart Moses. I always get those mixed up. Stuart Moses. back in the 1800s. So the machine translation is pretty accurate. Jurgens gives as all divinely inspired scripture belongs to us Christians. The books are not undefined, but defined and have canonical status. The machine translation is all of our Christian scriptures are divinely inspired and has books that are not indefinite, but defined and included in a certain canon. Probably the machine is actually a little bit more accurate than Jurgens. As we go through the list, there are some oddities now, so I'm going to focus on all the oddities of this list. For example, when you get to the book of Ezra, it says this: Ezra's first and second are combined into one volume. The first begins, and then it gives the first line, and then it says, of course, the second, and it gives the second line. So he's quoting the first line of each book, so you know exactly which book has been quoted, which is actually a really nice feature because, as you know, some canonical lists, or probably most of them, there is it's not specified exactly which book is being referenced. Like, for example, when we get to the books of Ezra, there's a number of books that claim to be written by Ezra or part of the collection of Ezra writings. And not all of them are, there's only, of course, two, Ezra and Nehemiah. But sometimes they'll have Greek Ezra, sometimes they'll have fourth Ezra, sometimes they'll have even weirder Ezras. So here it does the favor of quoting the first line. Now, what's interesting here, first he says that Ezra and Nehemiah, first and second, are combined into one volume. This is a Jewish practice of combining Ezra into one volume, Ezra and Nehemiah as one, okay? That's, in fact, and people could dispute that, whether that's strictly Hebraic practice or not, but I believe it is. Only the rabbis do that in order to come up with a 22-book computation, which is also, I think, distinctly Jewish. But the first line that he quotes isn't from Ezra and Nehemiah or Ezra. He quotes from Greek Ezra or third Esdras as first Ezra, as you would probably see in a codex of the Septuagint, okay, which is not, first, it's different from Athanasius, who doesn't do that. And it's kind of weird to see Greek Esdras as part of the 22 books. In fact, I think if you ask most Protestant apologists out there, whether Greek Esdras was computed as part of the 22 by Rabbinic Judaism, they would say no, yet it is here. And which is kind of interesting because I believe Josephus uses Greek Ezra, if I remember, and he has a 22-book list of histories. So be that as it may, that is bizarre, to say the least. Okay. So you have the question of, like, what exactly is he trying to reproduce? Is he producing Christian canonical stuff, which seems to be intimated in the beginning? Is he trying to reproduce the rabbinic canon? Is he saying they both are the same? This can't be the same because the rabbis don't accept Greek Esdras. Unless we're talking the diaspora, and I don't even know if the diaspora would, to tell you the truth. So that's bizarre. And then it continues on, and it gives the 3 books of Solomon. I just put this here because notice it's not the 5 books as you see in the North African councils, but the 3 books, which is Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Songs. Then it continues with Job. I just want to show you that it doesn't have Wisdom of Solomon or Sirach. Then continuing on, you get to this. It says the canonical books of the Old Testament are therefore numbered 22 in number, equal in number to the letters of the Hebrew alphabet. Now, that is a distinctly rabbinic idea that's repeated elsewhere. For example, in Athanasius, Vestal letter, he says the same thing, that the canonical Old Testament books are 22 in number. It says, besides these, there is also other books of the same Old Testament which are not canonical and which are read only to the catechumen. These are Wisdom of Solomon, Sirach, and Esther, and others. Now, that's again very interesting, right? So Esther was not considered canonical. Okay. It's read only to the catechumens. So we have some points of contact with the 39 Festal Letter and others that speak about the 22 books of the Old Testament. It's interesting, guys. Notice that he considers these other books to be from the Old Testament. So this is within the Old Testament corpus, but they're not considered canonical, which is interesting. And then it says that which is read only to the catechumen. This goes beyond Athanasius. Athanasius does not say that the second category of books, which includes the Deuterocanon plus Esther minus Baruch, because Baruch in the epistles considered canonical, which there doesn't seem to be indication in this work that he put in the canonical writings. It doesn't say that it's read only to the catechumen. It just says that it calls them the anagnoskomena, the books that are read, which I do not believe. Oh, yeah, he does. He calls it the anagnoskomena, the books that are read. But then he puts the qualification that it's only to the catechumen, which Athanasius doesn't say only. Which, again, is weird. Then continuing on, he gives the Judith, and he gives the first line of Judith, Tobit, first line of Tobit. And then he ends with this. These are not canonical. These are the ones not canonized. Okay, so he separates it from the canonized books. Now, moving on, he then makes this very interesting claim. He says, some ancients, however, said that the book of Esther was considered canonical among the Hebrews. Now, stop there. This is bizarre. Okay. He says some ancients believe Esther is canonical among the Hebrews. Now, I think this is actually kind of important because whoever this guy is, whenever he's writing, he's aware that some early church fathers were trying to reproduce the books accepted by the Hebrews, which is part of the thesis of our presentations here. This is why I believe a lot of these lists they're not Christian writing, Christian lists of books that we consider canonical, but rather they're trying to inform Christians about the books that the rabbis accept for the purpose of evangelism, because you want to have mutually accepted books. That's the working thesis of the chill streams and my own personal view. And this actually kind of speaks to it, that when you're trying to reproduce it, some people believe Esther is canonical, and which of course goes against Athanasius, but it lines with like Amphiliochius and Gregory Nazianzus and some other people who point to some doubts about Esther's canonicity. And then it talks about how Ruth was joined together with Judges and included a number of one book, but Esther was counted as another book. And thus, again, they wished the number to be 22 canonical books completed among them. So again, it shows that artificiality of the 22. And then it says, indeed, there are so many books of this kind, both in the canon and outside the canon of the Old Testament. And then it says, but of these are the new, definite, and canonical books. And then it continues to talk about the New Covenant books, Matthew and Mark and Luke and so on. So what in the world is that summary? Indeed, there are so many books of this kind, both in the canon and outside the canon of the Old Testament. You guys can try to figure that one out. I don't understand that at all. Like I said, this is a weird list. Moving on, another little quote just to point out the weirdness is these are the canonical books of the New Testament, and as it were, some of the first or anchors or supports of the faith, since they were written and published by the apostles of Christ himself, who conversed with them and were taught by him, although they were written according to the norm and harmony of these, and innumerable others were elaborated by the great, wisest, most divine fathers in the course of time for testimony and illustration of the foregoing, of which we have no occasion now to speak, since they are very many and indefinite, and at the same time all the same norm and ancient follows them and expound and declare the same. Okay. So it seems like there's a lot of early church fathers. Again, that would probably point to a later date. Of these, therefore, as has been said, all the books of the Old Testament and New Testaments, Old and New Testaments are included, which we have already briefly mentioned as regards only to the number, but now we must deal fully with the same books, namely by whom each was written and from whence each has the name that was given, and what's contained in themselves must be explained summarily and comprehensively according to the order given above, each being described by name. So basically, it moves on to the synopsis part, where he gives, this goes on for pages, where he gives basically almost like a paragraph or two, sometimes very longer summaries of the books. And within this synopsis, interesting enough, what do we find? Amongst the canonical books, we find Baruch. And it says, Baruch, the book was inscribed because it was written, because when he had written these words from the mouth of Jeremiah to those who are wandering in Babylon as captives, he read them in order to comfort them and to announce their hope in God. So Baruch ends up in the synopsis, which is kind of strange. Not to mention that, but this is an interesting line, which maybe provide a little bit of a clue as to why, I forgot, it's the fathers of the East or West, why when they cite Baruch, they cite it as Jeremiah or belonging to Jeremiah. It could be because of this belief that basically Baruch simply wrote down the words of Jeremiah. So it's a separate book, the book of Baruch, and yet Baruch is not the primary author. It's actually the prophet Jeremiah. That would explain some of the inconsistency of the early church fathers citing Baruch as Jeremiah. But given the tenor of this writing, I would not put very much weight on anything it says, quite frankly. And then it gives a brief description of Lamentations. Then it describes the Epistle of Jeremiah, which is Baruch chapter 6 in current modern Bibles. The Epistle of Jeremiah is so called because Jeremiah wrote it in captivity. So it believes it's a genuine work of Jeremiah in order to make them cautious against idols, lest, having seen them, be led away to worship them as idolaters. So you have Baruch and the Epistle being described, actually separated by Lamentation. So you have Baruch, Lamentations, and the Epistle, which is kind of the canonical order, quote unquote, of those books. At the end of the canonical books of the Old Testament, numbering 22, is counted the number of Hebrew letters, for among them there is as many elements of letters as we have said. The same must be said of the other books of the Old Testament, which are not in the canon, but are only read as was said above. So here we have Esther in the description of the non-canonical books, as you can see, along with Judith, Tobit, Wisdom of Solomon, and Sirach. Of the books of the Old Testament which are spoken against, Antilegomena, which, by the way, is something Athanasius did not use, that term spoken against. I think Eusebius uses it, if I remember correctly. but it's often used with later lists where they break down the canonical, or no, they break scripture down into genuine, spoken against, and spurious. So it's like degrees of certainty as for their authenticity. So now it kind of uses terminology which maybe is akin to later list. That's my opinion. I haven't really thought about it, just off the top of my head, some thoughts. It says, of the books of the Old Testament which are spoken against, Anti-Lecomenon, we have already said that they are the wisdom of Solomon, the wisdom of Jesus, the son of Sirach, Esther, Judith, and Tobit. Also included among these are counted the 4 books of Maccabees, the Ptolemies, who knows what that is, the Psalms, the Song of Solomon, and the story of Susanna. These are from the Old Testament, which are spoken against. So the books spoken against are all of the above, although he breaks it into 2 sections. The second section includes 4 books of Maccabees, which this is pretty rare, where you see all 4 being listed. In fact, I think up to this point, we have not seen a list that speaks to 4th Maccabees. I don't know what the Ptolemies is. The Psalms, now obviously it can't mean the canonical Psalms, so maybe the Psalms of Solomon. The Song of Solomon, which sounds like the canonical work of Song of Songs. Maybe not. I don't know. And then, of course, you have Deuterocanon, Susanna. And he says they're in the Old Testament, but they're spoken against. So now we're not talking canonical, non-canonical. We're talking about disputed text. By whom? We don't know. It doesn't say who's disputing it. Is it Christians? Is it rabbis? Like I said, big question marks. And then it goes to the Apocrypha of the Old Testament. And these are Enoch, the patriarchs, the prayer of Joseph, the testament of Moses, the assumption of Moses, Abraham, Eldad and Medad, the prophets Elijah, the prophets Zephaniah, Zechariah, and the father of John. Baruch, is that second Baruch? Embek, I don't know what that is. Ezekiel and Daniel falsely inscribed. It says, but the New Testament, which are spoken against, are, and then it goes on with them. But we're focusing on the Old Testament here. Very weird. So this is what Athanasius would call heretical works that should never be read, if it's following Athanasius 39 Festal Letter. But notice, so this is what it calls the Apocrypha, which Protestants call the Deuterocanon. And notice, except for maybe Baruch, but Baruch was affirmed earlier. Who knows what it is? It's part of the Apocrypha, but not what Protestants call Apocrypha. So let's go to some ideas and theories in the literature. So we're going to go to secondary sources. This one's from Moses Stewart in his book, which is very non-biased title, Critical History and Defense of the Old Testament Canon. And you guessed it, it's pretty much a defense of the Protestant canon. Moses Stewart's okay, but very, very biased. He says this about the synopsis. It is easy to see that this is little else than an exact copy throughout of the list of Athanasius. Sorry, Moses, your bias has blinded you. It's not like Athanasius' list, as we've already seen. Not even close. But the writer is more explicit. While he omits Esther from his list, he gives an account of different opinion, vis the favor of inserting it, which Athanasius doesn't do. But he thinks that it's expounding on Athanasius' list, which of course is wrong because there's just so much here that doesn't square with Athanasius. So he also notices the usual manner in which Ruth is united with Judges, which is true. He also tells us that only the catechumen read the uncanonical, i.e. inspired books, which has been appended to the Old Testament. No, uninspired books, excuse me. Which is not like Athanasius. He doesn't restrict it only to catechumen. Rather, it's preferred to be read by catechumen. And also, when we looked at Athanasius in his other writings, very clearly understood these to be inspired, not uninspired. So this is directly against Athanasius's use of these books. This seems, of course, to exclude the public reading of them in at least the churches within his own circle of knowledge. Now, this is interesting because this directly contradicts Athanasius. And apparently Moses Stewart is oblivious to this because Athanasius calls it, and actually the Synopsis calls it, the books that are read, anagonoskomena, right? So how he can say that's excluded from public reading is beyond me. In fact, everybody says that even in the early church that these books were read publicly, not the Apocrypha, the true Apocrypha. That was the only things that were excluded because anything in the Septuagint was liable to be read in the liturgies, of course, with the North African councils, and even Laodicea. It restricts only canonical books. Having completed his list, the writer proceeds to give a synopsis of the contents of each book, and when he completed his summary of the canonical books, he again mentions the others are not read except in a limited manner already described, which again goes way against Athanasius. It seems singular that no mention is made of the Maccabees, Baruch, or editions of Daniel or Ezra, but I don't know how I could say that because that's not true, right? Nothing can be clearer, however, that Athanasius and the author of the Synopsis rejects the idea of inspiration in regards to what we now call the Apocryphal books. So he recognizes the ancient word Apocrypha doesn't fit the current Protestant definition of Apocrypha. And this is weird that it does reject inspiration, which what we've seen so far in our series, and everyone has affirmed the inspiration of these books in their usage. He calls the books that are spoken against as doubted, actually has denied. That's Moses Stewart. The books that are denied are Wisdom, Sirach, Esther, Judith, Tobit. With these are numbered Maccabees, 4 books, Ptolemaic, Psalms, Canticles, Susanna. These are the books of the Old Testament that are denied, literally spoken against. As this is quite an enlargement on the previous list of uncanonical books, so it serves to show that the latter class just mentioned did not attain even the privilege of being allowed to the catechumens, an inauspicious passage to the Romish Deuterocanon. Take that, you papist. Yeah, okay. So that's his opinion, which is strewn with errors. Okay, let's move on, guys. That's the worst. We'll get some better ones. This is a footnote to this book, Canonicity, a collection of early testimonies of canonical books of the New Testament. That's why you hardly ever see this on the channel. It says, this synopsis is not regarded as genuine. It is not mentioned by any ancient author as the work of Athanasius. Jerome is silent upon it, and it does not agree with the list, either in the Old Testament or New Testament, with those given in previous extract of the Paschal letter. Among other points of difference, we may notice that the synopsis does not mention Hermas and does not mention the Clementines in both respects, being opposite of the festal letter. But Athanasius doesn't mention the Clementine literature, so I don't know why it says that. But it is true that Hermas is omitted, which again is at variance with Athanasius. Continuing on, it says, it has been accepted to find an allusion to this in the passage of Athanasius, Apologia ad Constantium, Imp, page 236, when he speaks of the tuxe, I think it is. It's hard to see with my eyes here, of the Theos Graphon, so the divine scripture. But the problem is Tuxtia, I guess it is. Boy, it's hard to see. Cannot mean synopsis. So synopsis is supposed to have been as late as the 9th century. The text is abridged in the Ming, which is what I used. So he puts in the 9th century, and yeah, it is what it is. Now, Ryle, and by the way, I'll give you the link here if you want to check out Ryle's book. At the end has an appendix of all the uses of 4th Ezra, and he notes that the synopsis does actually seem to be quoting 4th Ezra as some added information about Ezra, which I thought was weird and interesting. But actually, a lot of early church fathers use 4th Ezra, that scene where he supposedly reproduced the books of the Bible. Moving on, this is Archibald Alexander. Or is it Alexander Archibald? I think it's Alexander Archibald. Sorry about that. The Canon of Old and New Testament, ascertained, or the Bible complete without the Apocrypha and the unwritten traditions. Of course, that's not a biased title at all. It says this: to this uniform body of ancient testimony, there is nothing that can be objected except that the author of the synopsis, commonly ascribed to Athanasius, says Peter dictated the Acts of the Apostles, but Luke wrote them. Now, let me stop there. So he's saying, I don't really see any problems with the synopsis, which is problematic in itself, right? Except that it's ascribed to Athanasius. And this, that Peter dictated the Acts of the Apostles to Luke, who wrote them. So this is another weird thing. That's why I included this clip. The synopsis says this. But if it were true, it would not be in the least detract from the authority of the book, but rather increase it. I don't know how he could say that. One testimony, however, can be of little avail against so many, and we know that Luke knew most of the facts recorded in this book by his own personal observation. We know that from the we passages where he includes himself with Paul, and needed no one to dictate them to him. Besides this, Peter was not eyewitness to most of the stuff in the book. So you have this like weird opinion. I don't think it's paralleled anywhere in the writings of the early fathers. I don't know, guys. Maybe you know more than I really haven't studied too much the New Testament canon, at least in depth. But do you know anybody that ascribes Acts of the Apostles to Peter, like Mark? I don't know. That's just so weird. I had to include that. Like I said, this is like such a weird mishmash of weirdness. I think that's a good description of synopsis. A weird mishmash of weirdness. Okay. This is Roos. Now, I like Roos. One of my favorite authors. I believe he's Lutheran. In his History of the Canon of the Holy Scriptures, he says, another list of the biblical books of much more uncertain date and origin, boy, that's true, is a synopsis of the Holy Scriptures printed in several editions of the works of Athanasius, but certainly not written by that author and signed by modern critics. This is the 1800s, guys, to a much more recent period, although it's difficult to fix it exactly. And I think, yeah, I would concur with that. But though no one can in these days appeal to this document as an authentic testimony of the 4th century. So he says, no, it's not 4th century for sure. I would probably agree with that. I take care not to neglect it. I believe it to be a kind of commentary or paraphrase made by some unknown person on the analogous text of the Festal letter and allusions to Patriarch of Alexandria. So he thinks he's riffing off Athanasius, but it's not Athanasius. It's some unknown author, and it's not authentic testimony of the 4th century. He says the catalog, the catalog agrees with that of the epistle in almost all details. I actually disagree with him on that. Well, at the same time, it gives indications of a more modern point of view. Yeah, it's weird. Yeah, I don't know what its opinions reflect, to tell you the truth. It's all over the map. Thus, the 22 books of the Old Testament are reckoned exactly as the old list, Ruth standing by itself and Esther being excluded. Well, yeah, kind of, which constitutes a peculiarity remarkable enough to establish a relationship of the two documents. Yeah, but there's other documents that do the same. So, too, the author of the Synopsis appends to the list of canonical books of the Old Testament a series of books of not canonical but reserved for the reading of catechumens. Actually, Roos should have said only the catechumens, which is peculiar. And he gives a footnote, so he probably gives the Greek. The Wisdom of Solomon, Ecclesiasticus, Esther, Judith, and Tobit. That is textually, oops, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to advance the slide. That is textually the distinction drawn by Athanasius. Only the latter also mentions the apostolic constitutions and the pastor. Actually, I don't think he does. I think he mentions Shepherd of Hermas and Didache. I believe that's what he's actually mentioning, not the apostolic constitutions, which the former passes over in silence. So it's not part of the Synopsis, but it was part of Athanasius, probably because the church at the time, as time went on, abandoned the use of them. Okay, so that means it's later, right? Our commentator adds a note to inform us, according to early writers, that the book of Esther is canonical among the Hebrews, while Ruth is counted as an integral part of Judges. And so in the hypotheses of the second conjecture, whatever that is, the number 22 retains its apparent was a great point. Okay, okay, whatever. Hey, so-called Preston's in the house. Greetings, pleasant dreams, my friend. I'll launch you into dreamland in a few seconds as I'm doing my golden tones here at 4:20 in the morning at Eastern time. Continuing on, the Apocalypse, which Athanasius includes in this list without remark, our author finds it necessary to add to it, was received as the work of John the theologian and admitted as canonical by early and inspired fathers. A note which implies the fact that our fathers, perhaps not so early and at any rate otherwise inspired, did not share that opinion. In other words, Roos thinks by him going out of his way to remark about the inspiration of the book of Revelation, hints that, he's protesting too much, that at the time Revelation was still being disputed, so it tries to affirm it. After giving a complete enumeration of all the biblical books, the author of Synopsis takes them all up again in the same order that he may enter into more or less extended details by way of introduction, so that he goes into the Synopsis part. Then he adds a catalog of Antilegomena and Apocrypha, which shows that he was drawing from different sources without using any criticism. Actually, I should have highlighted that. That's very important. So now he shifts from canonical, uncanonical to Antilegomena, Apocrypha. And Bruce says this shows that he's drawing from different sources without using criticism, and that his notion even of the canon could hardly have been farther from being precise and settled. So I think he's actually right on that. I think the synopsis is actually a synopsis of all sorts of different sources that were kind of thrown together haphazardly. That's the only way I can kind of understand why this is so strange. The head of the Antilegomena, those that are disputed or spoken against, is once more introduced as wisdom, Ecclesiasticus, Esther, Judith, Tobit, and with the 4 books of Maccabees, Song of Solomon's, the story of Susanna, Acts of Peter, John, Thomas, the Gospel of Thomas, the Apostolic Constitutions, and the inspired extracts of the Clementines, which means no doubt the Orthodox recension of the famous romance. So, again, more weirdness upon weirdness. The confusion of the author's ideas betrays itself. By the way, Roos doesn't do a good job here. It's a bit confusing. The confusion of the author's ideas betrays itself most of all in the fact that he ends his list of the anti-legomena, those spoken against, with these words. These are the books which are read. Okay. So these books are read? By whom? When? How? When he says these books are read, are those that are only read by the catechumen? But are we really to believe that the Gospel of Thomas and the Apostolic Constitutions, which probably is the Didache or the Clementine letters, were written by or read only by the catechumen? Guys, this is so weird, right? Because if the catechumen are newly instructed Christians, would you have them read only things that are spoken against, disputed? It doesn't make any sense. This would lead us to think, says Roos, that the term anti-legomenon and Deuterocanon were with him synonymous, but he immediately adds that he has enumerated them only by way of memorandum because they are more worthy of being hid than being read. I see no way of harmonizing these contradictory statements than by saying that an ignorant compiler collected them from various sources without succeeding in reconciling them, perhaps without perceiving they are irreconcilable. And guys, that is the money quote right there. I think he nailed it. Although I disagree that he conflates anti-legomenon with Deuterocanon, because these books aren't part of the Deuterocanon, like Esther, for example. Of course, New Testament Deuterocanon would include these books. So he drops the ball on that account, but I think he's absolutely right. He says there's no other way of harmonizing these contradictory statements than by saying the ignorant compiler collected from various sources without succeeding in reconciling them, perhaps without perceiving they are irreconcilable. That's what it seems to be. It just seems like some writer, which would suggest later in history, just compiled a whole bunch of sources and put them into the one text. Maybe. I don't know. Okay, so finally, guys, we want to end with this. So bring some light of clarity into all this confusion. We have Roger Pierce. He's pretty good. He's got a blog out there. I think I don't know if I give the URL to his thing, but you could just type in Roger Pierce. What the heck is the synopsis of sacred scripture? Great title. And he's a patrologist, I believe. And he's got some good comments. He's not really up on canonical issues. He has a couple articles on the canon, which I don't recommend simply because he's not a specialist in that area. But when it comes to this, he does a good job explaining the weirdness of this weird document. So Roger Pierce writes, quote, "This list is clearly based on an earlier canon list of the Alexandrian Fathers, in which the canon of the Old Testament is restricted to Hebrew books minus Esther." Yeah, kind of. It also explains, as an earlier list, that these books are counted as 22 among the Jews. Yep, Athanasius does that explicitly. But the scripture quotations from the beginning of each book has been supplied by someone who is not very familiar with the subject. He does not realize that in the earlier catalogs, the two books of Esdras are Ezra and Nehemiah. And so for the beginning of the first book, he quotes from the apocryphal first Esdras of the Septuagint, Greek Ezra, like we pointed out. His quotation of the beginning of Daniel, now this is something I didn't point out. When he does a synopsis of Daniel, or excuse me, when he's listing Daniel, he quotes from the apocryphal story of Susanna, which is an addition to the beginning of Daniel in the Theodotian Greek version. Okay, so if you remember, but later he puts it, Susanna, amongst the Anagnoska men, I believe. So that's interesting. So he quotes from Deuterocanon as part of Daniel. But then towards the end of the treatise, then towards the end of the treatise, he lists the story of Susanna as a disputed book, belonging in the same class as Tobit and Judith, etc. So what do you make of that? Regarding Esther, he seems to be unaware of the difference between the Hebrew book and the expanded version of Septuagint. The decision to place it with the apocryphal books may be due to the fact that peculiar redaction of the book was regarded as inauthentic. I don't know about that. Okay, in the list of the apocryphal books that follow, we notice, no, I guess he means apocryphal like in the Protestant sense of the term. I don't know. But because he doesn't put these as apocryphal in the synopsis, we notice that the books of Maccabees are not mentioned. They are mentioned later in belonging to the class of disputed books, although with Susanna and such non-canonical works as the Psalms and Odes of Solomon. The list of New Testament books, Hebrews is listed 10th among the 14 epistles of Paul between Thessalonians and the pastorals. And this is important. This is the order of the epistles in the great unsical manuscripts of the 4th and 5th centuries, Vaticanus, Synecticus, and Alexandrinus. So he's apparently listing them according to the canonical order in these great codices. It reflects the judgment of the Eastern churches that Hebrews definitely belonged with the epistles of Paul. We might wonder why the first sentence is quoted from each book. Perhaps it's to prevent confusion because some writers use different names for some of the books, especially the books of Chronicles, Ezra, and Nehemiah. And there were non-canonical recensions of Daniel and Esther, which could be distinguished from or by such quotations. Yeah, but that didn't help in the case of Daniel, did it? But this was the purpose of the author has only increased the confusion by quoting from the wrong books and recensions noted above. So, yeah, exactly. So he's using Judeo books listed as canonical books where later he says they're disputed and thrown out, which is really weird, right? Maybe the author has quoted the first sentence of each book merely in imitation of Origen, who at each book of the Old Testament, he gives the Jewish name for it, basing upon the opening words of the Hebrew text. I don't think so, because basically the titles of the books come from the opening words of the text. And so he's only giving titles. He's only giving one word, not the first sentence like the synopsis does. So I think Roger Pierce is wrong on that part. In general, the quotations correspond to the text of the old unsical manuscripts as opposed to medieval cursives. Okay, so whoever this is, they're using the great codices, at least in terms of order. In the list of New Testament books, I already have that. Okay. There is no critical edition of the text, and the only translation of that of Musculus into Latin. The opening section of the work has been translated in English by Michael D. Marlowe and is placed online here. That's the nice thing about Roger Pierce. He gives the hyperlinks. Studies of the work have been few. The only serious study until a decade ago was undertaken by Theodor Zahn in 1890. Zahn established that the work was not an original literary composition. Rather, it is a collection of materials about books of the Bible and their contents, assembled from pre-existing sources in a pretty raw manner. The work contradicts itself. At one time, it describes the Old Testament Apocrypha as useful for reading, and another time it states that it should not be read. The work has always been recognized as spurious. Montfaucon, in his preface, lists some of the reasons why. No work of this title was attributed to Athanasius in any ancient or medieval source. We could detail list of his works in Jerome and Photius, and it's not there, basically. Is not found in the works of Athanasius' manuscripts. It contradicts what Athanasius says about the canon in this 39th Vestal letter and ignores the Shepherd of Hermas, so dear to Athanasius' heart. The synopsis takes material from the genuine Vestal letter 39. A section of a translation of the Old Testament is taken word for word from Epiphanius, or Epiphanes, or whatever you pronounce it. Another section belongs to the strange book of Josephus Christatus. The contents of Leviticus, Parapolipomenon, Esdras, Proverbs, Job, Esther, Judith, Tobit, Sapienza, Solomon, Basic Wisdom of Solomon, is most literally identical with corresponding sections of the Synopsis of Sacred Scripture of Pseudo-Chrysostom, another confused text of the same genre, which appears to be older than Pseudo-Athanasius. Okay, so we see all sorts of plagiarism going on here. Of course, back then it wasn't considered plagiarism, but be that as it may. So then he quotes Theodore Zahn in his conclusion. So this is Zahn's conclusion. We cannot be more precise on the period when the Athanasian Synopsis was written. For the time being, there is nothing to be found in relation to Josephus Christatus. For one, the original affiliation with the parallel sections on Synopsis is highly doubtful. Two, that Josephus, whose work is nothing more than a compilation of different books, may as well have drawn from this passage from our synopsis, but conversely. And the time of Josephus is unknown, or at least an uncertain thing. So basically he says, yeah, we see some similar stuff with Josephus Christatus, but who's borrowing from whom? Is it the synopsis borrowing from Josephus, or is it Josephus borrowing from the synopsis? Josephus seems to be a compilation of text, so it's quite possible it could be one way or another, but it still doesn't help the dating because we don't even know when Josephus Christatus was writing. So one big question mark again. The dependence of our synopsis on that of Chrysostom, on the 39th Vestal letter of Athanasius, on the 5th century Palestinian canon. Again, I'd flag that because that sounds like it's kind of outdated theories on a canon by Roger Pierce. I would say Joseph Pierce. Was probably also on Epiphanius, places us in a monastery or church library in which these diverse spirits were united as equally venerable authorities. The compilation certainly did not come into existence before the 6th century, perhaps even later. So that's interesting. So Roger Pierce thinks it's actually 6th century or later. Zahn, and I would probably agree with that because, and I mentioned this on the members hangout, if you look at how texts are treated in the early church, you have the Apostolic Fathers, the Age of Apologists, Golden Age, right, of the early church fathers, up to the 5th century. And then what you start finding from the 6th century onward is a tendency simply to compile and preserve ideas. So the innovation starts to drift off until you end the age of the early church fathers with Isidore and John of Damascus. Then the early medieval period is just compiling and preserving these ideas. And that's kind of what the synopsis seems to me. It seems like whoever put this together first, I don't know, were they drinking? I don't know, but they wrote all this down haphazardly and just drawing indiscriminately from different sources. The whole idea of putting all this together like this smacks to me like early medieval period. So I'd probably agree. It's certainly not before the 6th century. I would tend to push it late, but I have no idea how late. Zahn wrote more than a century ago, and no one's ventured to touch the work since. The only subsequent work is Giles Dorval in 2005, but this I have not seen, and know only of a review. And he gives the review thing. The work has been done on related Pseudo-Chrysostom Synopsis, but that's another story. The text is related in some way to the Euthenian materials which appear in the margins and between books of the medieval Greek biblical manuscripts. That's interesting. So we are dealing with a mass of non-literary material about the Bible, changed by every hand that touched it, incarnate in a variety of versions, and attributed to a variety of authors, none of them genuine. It's really very much like the Vitae Prophetorum Fabulosa that we encountered with Pseudo-Athanasius, says Roger Pierce. So yeah, that's it, guys. That's where we're going to leave it. What is the synopsis of sacred scripture? When was it written? Who wrote it? What does it represent? I have no idea. I think it's late. Certainly, I think it's 6th century or afterwards. I agree with Roger Pierce. It's drawing from all sorts of sources. There's no doubt about that. It also puts in some opinions, which you're not really sure. Is that the source's opinion or is it the synopsis opinion? It kind of sort of aligns with some canonicalist, but it also is just weird. So I'm going to stick with my original assessment. It is a pile of weirdness. And that's where we're going to leave it. You don't see it used very often with people who examine the canon. They kind of have to include it because it is out there. But as you can see, it's not something that you could base any kind of theory on because we don't have a clue about its origins or intentions or anything. That's it. All right, guys, let's go to the chat room. By the way, SoCal, I hope you're sound asleep after a busy day. Fizzmeister, I think it is. Fizzmeister says, hello, Gary. Thanks for the insomnia stream. You're welcome. And I hope you have a good slumber. This doesn't put you to sleep. I don't know what will. Slept through 95% of this. Gotta rewatch Laugh Out Loud. Yes, we are putting people to sleep here in the chill streams. But that's fine. You could watch it later when you're awake and then feel drowsy. So don't do it. Don't listen to this while you're driving a car or operating heavy machinery. That's all I got to say. But nevertheless, we're having fun here in the dojo, the Apocrypha Apocalypse. At least I enjoyed it. It's one of those things that you just scratch your head and say, I just don't get this thing. Maybe you guys, actually, that's one of the reasons I'm doing this. I'd love to hear what you think of the synopsis. Put it in the comments. Let me know what your theory is, how you might reconcile this. I'm open to suggestions, as always. So let's see. Oh, yeah, it's 12:40 in the afternoon. And where are you again at Glorium Christi? 12:40 in the afternoon. It's probably Australia. Maybe. Let me know. This is a dangerous stream to be watching at that time of day. After the plague, question mark, may have something to do with it. Maybe. Secret word. Thank you, Lino. Pseudo-Athanasius. Yeah, we are coming to that time. These chill streams don't make me fall asleep. They keep me up. Very interesting. Wow. Well, Doubter 04, thank you. That's not the impression I get. Sam Shamoon has some of his best sleep during these chill streams. I'm in the Middle East. Oh, okay. Oh, wow. Okay. So we're noon in the Middle East. Well, welcome aboard, my friend. We're all over the world. That's why I love doing chill streams, by the way, because we have Aussies brothers and sisters join us, UK brothers and sisters joining us, Middle East. A lot of places that, obviously here in America, everybody streams during prime time. And probably the lion's share of the traffic's during prime time. And unfortunately, you guys are neglected, at least from streams coming from America. So I'm glad to be here with you guys talking about the Canon. Any thoughts or questions before we go? You can put up there. Nice and warm. Yeah. We're actually going to have a nice day here in Michigan. It's going to get up to almost 70 degrees Fahrenheit, which is balmy for this time of year. Unusually warm. So I know Gary 2.0 will be jealous of that. All right. Loving the weather in the Middle East. Yes. Except for summer, I imagine. So, okay, guys, we're going to close. I think we're all done. So we put a fork into this Pseudo-Athanasius. Next chill stream, Wednesday, 3:30 if God wakes me up. So it's important for you to like, subscribe, hit the bell. The bell might alert you. Also, we're going to do some team streams. Don't know when. I'd like to do maybe a Tuesday team stream. If David or William are listening, maybe we could shoot for that because that's usually when Sam Shamoon's not doing stuff. So, guys, here's your chance. Since you've stayed awake till the end of the presentation, it's your time to flex to the world that you stayed awake. And that's something to brag about. So put in the stream Pseudo-Athanasius. And that is a long secret word, but we'll go with that. And show everybody that you're awake. You have the fortitude to withstand even one of my talks. All right. Till next time, I hope everybody has a fantastic day or a very peaceful night. Take care. Bye-bye.